Francisco is gone. Nothing remains of it but memories and a fringe of dwelling houses on its outskirts. Its industrial section is wiped out. Its business section is wiped out. Its social and residential section is wiped out. The factories and warehouses, the great stores and newspaper buildings, the hotels and the palaces of the nabobs are all gone. Remains only the fringe of dwelling houses on the outskirts of what was once San Francisco. Within an hour after the earthquake shocked the smoke of San Francisco's burning, was a lurid tower visible 100 miles away. And for 3 days and nights, this lurid tower swayed in the sky, reddening the sun, darkening the day, and filling the land with smoke. Wednesday morning, at 5:15, came the earthquake. A minute later, the flames were leaping upward in a dozen different quarters south of Market Street, in the working-class ghetto, and in the factories, fire started. There was no opposing the flames. There was no organization, no communication. All the cunning adjustments of a 20th century city had been smashed by the earthquake. The streets were humped into ridges and depressions, and piled with the debris of fallen walls. The steel rails were twisted into perpendicular and horizontal angles. The telephone and telegraph systems were disrupted, and the great water mains had burst. All the shrewd contrivances and safeguards of man had been thrown out of gear by 30 seconds twitching of the earth crust. By Wednesday afternoon, inside of 12 hours, half the heart of the city was gone. At that time, I watched the vast conflagration from out on the bay. It was dead calm, not a flicker of wind stirred. Yet, from every side, wind was pouring in upon the city. East, west, north and south, strong winds were blowing upon the doomed city. The heated air rising made an enormous suck. Thus did the fire of itself build its own colossal chimney through the atmosphere. Day and night, this dead calm continued. And yet, near to the flames, the wind was often half a gale, so mighty was the suck. Wednesday night saw the destruction of the very heart of the city. Dynamite was lavishly used, and many of San Francisco's proudest structures were crumbled by man himself into ruins. But there was no withstanding the onrush of the flame. Time and a again, successful stands were made by the firefighters. And every time the flame flanked around on either side or came up from the rear and turned to defeat the hard-won victory. Remarkable as it may seem, Wednesday night, while the whole city crashed and rolled into ruin, was a quiet night. There was no crowds, there was no shouting and yelling, there was no hysteria, no disorder. Before the flames, throughout the night, fled tens of thousands of homeless ones. Some were wrapped in blankets, others carried bundles of bedding and dear household treasures. Sometimes the whole family was harnessed to a carriage or delivery wagon that was weighted down with their possessions. Baby buggies, toy wagons, and go-karts were used as trunks, while every other person was dragging a trunk. Yet everybody was gracious. The most perfect courtesy obtained. Never in all San Francisco's history were her people so kind and cautious as on this night of terror. All night, these tens of thousands fled before the flames. Many of them, the poor people from the labor ghetto, had fled old days as well. They had left their homes burdened with possessions. Now and again they lightened up, flinging out upon the street clothing and treasures they had dragged for miles. They held on longest to their trunks, and over these trunks many a strong man broke his heart that night. The hills of San Francisco are steep, and up these hills, mile after mile, were the trunks dragged. Everywhere were trunks, with across them lying their exhausted owners, men and women. Before the march of flames were flung picket lines of soldiers, and a block at a time. As the flames advanced, these pickets retreated. One of their tasks was to keep the trunk pullers moving. The exhausted creatures, stirred on by the menace of bayonets, would arise and struggle up the steep pavement, posing from weakness every 5 or 10 feet. Often, after surmounting heartbreaking ill, they would find another wall of flame advancing upon them at right angles and be compelled to change a new line of the retreat. In the end, completely played out, after toiling for a dozen hours like giants, thousands of them were compelled to abandon their trunks. Here, the shopkeepers and soft member of the middle class were at a disadvantage, but the working men dug holes in vacant lots and backyards and buried their trunks. Surrender was complete. There was no water. The sewer had long since been pumped dry. There was no dynamite. Another fire had broken out further uptown. And now, from 3 sides, conflagrations were sweeping down. The 4th side had been burned earlier in the day. bed on the grass. Government tents had been set up. Supper was being cooked, and the refugees were lining up for 3 meals. At 1:30 in the morning, 3 sides of Union Square were in flames. The 4th side, where stood the great St. Francis Hotel, was still holding out. An hour later, ignited from top and sides, the St. Francis was flaming heavenward. Union Square, heaped high with mountains of trunks, was deserted. Troops, refugees, and all had retreated. On Thursday morning, at 5:15, just 24 hours after the earthquake, I sat on the steps of the small residence on Nob Hill. With me sat Japanese, Italians, Chinese and Negroes, a bit of the cosmopolitan flotsam of the wreck of the city. All about were the palaces of the Nabob pioneers of 49. To the east and south, at right angles, were advancing 2 mighty walls of flames. Outside the old Mark Hopkins residence, a palace was just catching fire. The troops were falling back and driving the refugees before them. From every side came the roaring of flames, the crashing of walls, and the detonation of dynamite. I passed out of the house. Day was trying to dawn through the smoke cloud. The sleekly light was creeping over the face of things. Once only the sun broke through the smoke cloud, low, red, and showing quite its usual size. The smoke cloud itself, viewed from beneath, was a rose color that pulsed and fluttered with lavender shades. Then it turned to mauve and yellow and dun. There was no sun, and so dawned the second day on stricken San Francisco. All day Thursday and all Thursday night, all day Friday and Friday night, the flames still raged on. The bankers and businessmen are already set about making preparation to rebuild San Francisco.